we should have had some of our opponents here so we could hear their ideas. We're not hearing any of their ideas. We're hearing the ideas that are coming from one side.
Good evening. I am Liz Workman, Secretary of the I-35W Solutions Alliance and District 5 Dakota County Commissioner representing most of Burnsville. I'd like to thank and welcome all of you who are here this evening for our legislative candidate forum to discuss the transportation issues affecting the districts along the I-35W corridor. The Alliance consists of the cities of Minneapolis, Richfield, Bloomington, Burnsville, Savage, and Lakeville, soon to add Elko New Market at the end of the year, and the counties of Hennepin, Scott, and Dakota. We have been hosting these forums since 2002, and they are always very informative and valuable to the citizens in our district. The format is different this year, and we hope more efficient. It has been broken up into 2 one-hour sessions with candidates from certain districts participating in each session, allowing for the much smaller groups. Our thanks to the candidates for participating in the forum and to our moderator, Bill Salisbury, from the Pioneer Press. Mr. Salisbury had moderated the forums in the past and graciously agreed to do so again this year. So with that said, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Bill Salisbury. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody. I'd like to start the discussion tonight by just having you each introduce yourselves to the audience and the viewers, and just give us a brief rundown of where you're coming from on the major issues. And let's start with Mr. Germain.
Good evening. My name is Mike Germain. I hope to represent the communities of Rosemont, Apple Valley, and a sliver of Burnsville, making up Senate District 37. I would like to see the fine work of the I-35W Alliance replicated along the Cedar Avenue corridor. I think that the work that the I-35W Alliance has done over the course of many years really serves as a wonderful model for what can be accomplished over the course of the next coming years as we tackle many of the same kinds of issues along the Cedar Avenue corridor that have been addressed already along the 35W corridor. And so I think that that is an area that I will be focusing on to see what we can do to create the kind of institutional systems that will create a seamless transit way and transportation corridor that will fulfill the needs of the future.
Okay. Next is Mr. Lindstrom.
Yeah, I'm Derrick Lindstrom. I'm the Democratic endorsed candidate for District 37A, which represents Apple Valley and that portion of Burnsville as well. I do think that fundamentally talking to people at the doors, transportation is a pretty key issue in this upcoming election, along with jobs and education. And I think that we need to find a way that we can get people to their jobs, products to the buyers, and people to work, in a very efficient system.
All right. And next up is Senator Jim Carlson.
Good evening. I'm Senator Jim Carlson, and I'm from Eagan. And if you live south of Lone Oak Road in Eagan, then I'm your state senator. If you live south of Highway 13 and east of Parkwood Avenue, I'm your state senator. And thank you very much for having this forum. And I've participated with the I-35W Solutions Alliance, even though Commissioner Workman didn't mention Eagan as a city. That's part of it. But whenever people do not go up 35W, they often come up 35E, which is in Eagan. Plus, some of the things that we've worked on in the 35W Solutions Alliance affect Highway 77 or Cedar Avenue. So this is the forum that gives you the idea of what's going on in I-35W and all of the things that they are working on, all the way from, as Commissioner Workman said, all the way from down in the southern part of the county, even down to Elko now, all the way up to downtown Minneapolis, and that includes some of the streets that have been modified in downtown Minneapolis due to that United Partnership Agreement. So this is a very good learning experience for me because I am on the Transportation Committee in the State Senate, and I'm the Vice Chair there. So I'm looking forward to trading some of the ideas, especially with some of the newer people that I'm going to be working with next year.
Thank you, Senator. Next up is Representative Sandra Masin.
I'm Sandra Masin, and I represent District 38A, which is essentially the western portion of Eagan, and then I have 3 precincts in Burnsville. And I do want to thank 35W Solutions for holding this event tonight. I'm in my 2nd term in the legislature, and 2 of the committees that I serve on are Transportation Finance and Transportation Policy. Transportation has been a big part of what I think is important to our future ever since I've served on the Eagan City Council, where I also was the liaison to the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority. And transit is one of the areas that I still think we need to do a lot of improvement on, as well as the gridlock that we have in many portions of our region.
All right, and last but not least, Representative Obermueller.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thanks to everybody for having us tonight, and certainly for the audience for coming as well tonight. I know you all have busy schedules, and we appreciate your time as well. I'm Mike Obermueller. I represent the east half of Eagan in District 38B. It's a real pleasure to be here. I don't have the committee experience that my colleagues in Eagan have, and I'm proud to have them as the experts on those issues. I did learn a lot about roads and bridges and transportation this year, not related to the legislature. I have a 16-year-old who just got his license. And a new appreciation, really, for how important it is to make sure we've got roads and bridges that are safe and that we've got transportation to get him back and forth to his job, and think about his future and where we're going to be 20 years from now when he's hopefully living in Eagan somewhere and commuting somewhere and getting a good job. And that's a perspective that was new to me coming into the legislature, and really enjoy the opportunity to talk about these issues tonight.
Well, I can guarantee you we will not have a partisan debate tonight. We have an all-DFL panel, but transportation is one of the least partisan issues that I've covered in the legislature. I don't think you'd find many differences across party lines. Next up, rather than going into anything real specific, I'd like to start out by asking you just to set out what your transportation priorities are. What do you see as the biggest needs that we have, and how would you address them? And let's start with you, Representative Obermueller.
Sure, thank you. Well, obviously we've got major challenges in a lot of areas of our budget. I think the big challenge for all of us here is the congestion piece in the South Metro. My district doesn't touch 35W, but we've got plenty of transportation challenges on our side of the river and our side of the area as well. And figuring out how we make sure that we put cars on the roads where we need them, and having the right infrastructure in place in terms of transit options in the right places where they need to go is kind of key to our future. We've talked about 1 million new people coming into the metro. I think now, because of the economy, we've probably slowed that way back. We're probably not going to see that 1 million people quite as quickly as we had anticipated, but we're still going to have lots of new people coming in. We still need a comprehensive land use plan around the Twin Cities, and then ultimately the transportation plan that kind of fits that web inside. And so that's one of the things we'll be continuing to work on.
Okay. Representative Masin?
First of all, I think we're continuing with the bridges as being extremely important since the collapse of the 35W. And we've put that into legislation, and that absolutely has to be at the top of our list. Secondly, is safety on our roads. I think as we're reading every day in the papers how many accidents there are, and particularly with our youthful drivers. So, and there are some things that I think we can do. In many cases, it might just be putting shoulders on roads, but those are issues that I think we need to really consider heavily. And then I think the most important thing as far as the future of Minnesota is the fact that we need to enhance our multimodal system, whether it's transit, whether it's commuter trains. Those are the things that we need to be looking at, and we are looking at them, but I think we need to get some money behind those projects as well.
Okay. Senator Carlson, give us your priority list.
Well, it's very difficult to prioritize because some of the things, the needs are so, you've often heard this term, there are priorities and then there are pressing needs. And some of them are more pressing. For instance, I think that we have to do our asset preservation, we have to do our maintenance. Just driving down here, I was thinking about that particular question, just what is a priority? And I generally get to this building by coming down 35E and then coming up 130th. And on 35E, the roadway is quite rough. And I was thinking back when Some of you may know that my wife is a German teacher, and so I travel to Germany frequently with her. And there the roads are so smooth and so wide and so well signed that anyone that goes there and comes back now is jealous of the Germans and how well they have planned their roads and how well they execute it. So that's an important thing to me, is to make sure that we have well-planned roads and that they're maintained well. The next thing I think is probably to eliminate the congestion by some of these new projects. And I know that we've had another panel up here and they talked a lot about new projects. And new projects are important, but they are also expensive. And sometimes, and I think there was discussion about doing some of the things that, the big hitters, the plums, try to do those first. And I think that's a good thing to say, except that the big issue, the elephant in the room, is money. And we are so short of money right now that I think we have a lot of priority assessment that we need to go through. I know that there are, every group is doing their priority list now, their transportation planning. And I think that it's going to come down to money. It always seems to come down to money. But I think we need to make sure that we take care of what we have first.
All right. Mr. Lindstrom.
I think the biggest challenge we face in my district is really the congestion on Cedar Avenue, along with the congestion on 35W. I teach at Minneapolis Community and Technical College. I travel that road, both of those roads on a daily basis. And I was actually reflecting in my car, much like my friends on the panel here. And I was thinking, I'm going to be going to work for at least the next 40 years in Minneapolis, and hopefully spending half of my time in St. Paul. But thinking about how are these roads going to change, and what's it going to look like as we grow, as Lakeville fills out, as the next ring of suburbs come in. And we can't sustain it right now. I was talking to a resident on the doors the other day, and she said, this congestion impacts me on the bottom line. And I was just like, well, how is that? Well, every time I'm stuck in that bottleneck on Cedar Avenue, it costs me $25 when I'm late to pick up my kids from daycare. That's money out of my pocket. And if we can find ways to create revenue to improve our transportation, it may cost me a few more dollars yearly, but it's going to cost me a lot less than those $25 every week or two when I'm stuck in traffic and I can't get my kids from daycare on time. So I think that's the biggest issue, and then maintaining the roads as well. I think is a big piece that we have to do. There's a pothole that comes up every fall on 35W, and if we take money away from preserving the roads to create new projects, then we have issues on both sides. So we need to have I think a balanced approach in terms of how we address those issues.
And Mr. Germain.
Well, I think we have a number of issues that we need to face, and they're all pressing. I think, it's in this environment, it's really difficult when you're looking at transportation being such a vital component to the overall health of our economy in our state. In our district, in the Cedar Avenue corridor, it seems to me that there has been a rush to complete certain projects so that projects are completed by an end date rather than accomplishing a project done well. For example, because of the fact that Lakeville will only carry one transit station, Apple Valley has to carry 3 major transit stations. On top of that, we're looking at the complete transformation of downtown Apple Valley through the introduction of a major transit station to 140th and another major transit station to 147th, which is going to change the landscape of Apple Valley. And I think that what we really need to do is really be thinking long-term in terms of how is it that we relieve congestion long-term. We really need to stop going to short-term fixes that we've seen in the past that might sound good, might look good for short-term, there's a lot of technical problems that are going on, like with the Cedar Avenue bus rapid transit implementation, where even with just 2 non-BRT buses in the bus ingress lane at the transit station to 155th Street, backs up traffic down to the next traffic light. And that is not even a BRT vehicle yet, that I don't even see how they're going to actually operate a BRT vehicle successfully on the shoulders that they're envisioning. But that being aside, I think one of the most important things that we can do is we really need to change the overall cultural mindset surrounding transportation. For too long, we have had greater Minnesota, urban Minnesota, ex-urban Minnesota at each other's throats, competing for each other for finite resources, when, in my mind, we really need almost a Marshall Plan for transportation in Minnesota, because absolutely, roads and bridges in greater Minnesota are in the worst shape in a generation. Bridges are nearly catastrophic. We have to address these issues in a forthright and honest fashion. And yet, on the other hand, we absolutely need to be modernizing our infrastructure so that we can compete with Denver and Salt Lake City and San Diego and the other commerce centers that we are competing with. We're not competing with Iowa. We're not competing with South Dakota. We're competing with Denver, Colorado. We're competing with Houston, Texas. I mean, these are the kinds of places that we need to be looking at as a model for what we want as a long-term vision for our community. And I think that as has been discussed in the other panel, I think that we need to be looking at a greater metro area that is much, much larger. We need to be looking at a 13-county area at least. We need to be looking at a corridor that stretches from St. Cloud down to Rochester. And, you know, we need to be looking at a comprehensive look at this, because, you know, it's very interesting to me as a citizen and as a voter that we hear candidates talk about how pro-business they are, about how pro-growth they are, and then they don't do the fundamental things to lay a groundwork for future success. And that's one of the things that I think that we need to do, is we need to be thinking long-term. We need to stop looking at the end of the next business cycle or the next quarter and think what our state is going to look like in 25 or 30 years, and then decide how we get there, and stop dithering around about you know, this individual project or that. We need a global approach to the problem and face it that way.
Senator Carlson, you brought the most interesting issue, the toughest one. That's show me the money. How are we going to pay for it? And it's going to be particularly challenging in this coming session with a $5.8 billion deficit. People will be looking for ways to cut things, not looking for new ways to finance projects. But transportation is a little different, since it relies primarily on dedicated sources of revenue. Some of those sources of revenue haven't been very stable. Gas tax is probably going to go down in the future. Motor vehicle sales tax is down from where it was just a few years ago. What ideas do you have for financing transportation?
Well, I think one of the things we first have to get educated on is why we are where we are today. We had the same per gallon fuel tax for 20 years, and that hurt us. We had raised fuel taxes for years before that, keeping up at a rate probably of about 15 and sometimes 20% of the cost of a gallon of fuel was tax. We dropped down to about 6%. And what that did is that hurt us for years. We have a pent-up demand now, and you know, some of the things that we could have done with those dollars was to do the matching that would have brought in federal funds and brought our roads up to date, the ones that the federal government was willing to give us grant money, and that all we had to do was provide matching money. We could have done that. We could have indexed the fuel tax, all of those kinds of things, and what that's done is it's put us behind. So we are behind now. And sometimes when you get behind, it's going to be painful to catch up. And so I think that we have to first recognize that it might be painful to catch up. We still are we're below, I think we're below about 30th in the nation now, something like that, with gas tax. And in fact, I even brought a little chart with me it's a couple of years old, but California has 45.5 cents a gallon tax, and we had 20 at that time. So some of these kinds of things we have to recognize that we're not getting the money that we need, and we're not putting it in there that we need. So if we're talking, and I really have to say that we should have had some of our opponents here so we could hear their ideas. We're not hearing any of their ideas. We're hearing the ideas that are coming from one side. And I think that we have to recognize that we have not collected the revenue that we should have for years, and now this has caused us a problem. One of the things that we have talked about in the past is having fuel taxes indexed to inflation. That's what a lot of the states do. So when you talk about where we are per gallon, sometimes the other states sneak upward as the inflation happens, or as might be a percent of the gas, the per pump, or the pump price of gasoline, which I think right now is $2.95. It's actually quite high. So we need to look at, are we collecting the revenue that we need to collect to be able to fund our infrastructure? And as we've already heard here, there's a cost to having business have their trucks stuck in traffic. There's a driver, there's a truck, there's the inventory. All of that costs a lot of money. And that, you could even say, is a tax. So we tax one way or we tax another. But if we tax as a user fee, I think that would probably be fair. And I'm not opposed to re-looking at that and looking at somehow getting more revenue out of the system.
Any of the rest of you chime in on the idea of a gas tax or some other user fee that might be available?
Let me just bring up something that I think was mentioned before, is the fact that there is talk about trying to maybe tax people according to the miles that they travel. Now, obviously, if you live in certain parts of the state, that is not going to be very popular at all. And yet, last night I was talking to somebody on the telephone that's still angry about the gas tax from 2008, which was a nickel, which took us up, just barely. And that was after 20 years. And if we had the inflation, we'd be at 32 cents. So, I mean, there's a lot of confusion, and there's still a lot of frustration just over that nickel tax that we did in 2008. And it's still not that wasn't enough to truly do the job that we need for all of MnDOT's projects. We're still way, way behind. And so it's trying to get the message out that we're putting projects down the road 20 years. That's just not, it just doesn't make sense to do that.
Yes, go ahead.
And I think one of the other aspects that hasn't been discussed very much is the fact that one of the major cost drivers is project inflation. And whenever you have projects that are delayed, the cost is astronomical. And I think that if we need to find a way that streamlines projects. A perfect one that I think is very illustrative is the multiple reconstruction of Highway 62 from Cedar Avenue to 35. That one small stretch of highway has been reconstructed no less than 3 times in the last few years to the cost of almost $100 million, a total cost to have the lanes readjusted and fiddled with. See, if some of these things were able to be streamlined so that projects, once committed, the projects were seen through to completion instead of constantly subject to delay. The undoing of the weave, the 494, 169 project. I mean, there are so many projects that have been, that the cost has been elevated because of delay after delay after delay, that I think that if we found a means to streamline, and it doesn't have to be the massive project each and every time, but these projects should not take 6 to 12 years to see a shovel turn before a project is completed. And I think that would have a big part of it too. But, part of the MVEST money is that, many people that have been a part of the transit community for many years, were predicting that MVEST would not fulfill the promises that were given about MVEST to begin with. And so there are many of us that are not at all surprised that MVEST has not come through the way that was sold to us. And that is no great surprise. And I think that transportation is one of those core issues that instead of utilizing things like property taxes as a hidden way to pay for highway maintenance, which is one of the great unknown uses of property taxes in this state, if people want to understand why their property taxes are so high, ask people why we're not having an honest assessment about how much it actually costs to park your car and drive on the highways and stuff like that. And I think that if we had an honest, upfront discussion about some of these things, then the citizens, if you tell them honestly how much something is going to cost, how it's going to benefit them in the future, how it's going to benefit their children in the future, the voters will go along with you. But when there's constant game playing and what is the actual truth about this and that, and I think, like was said, it's very easy when the numbers are so large and the stakes are so high that it's easy to get lost in rhetoric, but I think we really need a real hard focus on what the long-term implications are, and then, and look for the money. It's not going to be easy, but there's not going to be one single source of money that says we can pay for this project this way, we can pay for this one like this. We have to find a cohesive stream that pays for these projects long-term instead of constantly having to go back to the voters with a hat out.
Well, you bring up an interesting issue. Is there a way we could find more bang for the buck of the transportation dollars we're collecting now? Is there something we could do to improve our transportation funding system, or the way the MnDOT is setting its priorities?
Well, part of that is we, in my mind anyway, we have to make sure we're using the money wisely. I was proud to carry a bill called the Complete Streets Bill, which is we carried this year, that will help kind of plan ahead a little bit more on the roads. I think what Mr. Germain is talking about is making sure that when we put dollars into a project, we've got the project right the first time, and we don't spend money on a project and then have to go back in and do something different to it down the line. So that's one piece, is making sure that we're using the money kind of on each project. We've thought it out properly, and we've done it right. In Dakota County, though, we also have a little formula problem with the way the money is spent, and we have some concerns about whether or not Dakota County and surrounding areas are really getting the fair share of where that funding is coming, and we have to continue to look at that formula distribution as well.
And Bill, there's the idea of public-private partnerships also, and that has there's several aspects to that and how that actually gets rolled out. And for the most part, it's looking for a private partner that may have a particular interest in having that project done early. And I know in the prior panel there was one mentioned about United Healthcare out in the western suburbs, where they contributed to getting some of the, I believe it was some of the right-of-way purchased. Now, I have a little problem with some of that. What we need to do is have a very systematic way of evaluating it, because the negative on that is that can they buy their way into the priority system? And is that something that we want to get into, where a particular intersection may be funded because of who lives around it, or who is the business that's near it? But I think there is good things to look at there, and like I say, there's several ways that public-private partnerships can work. Another way, of course, is the notion of MnPass, and we always have to look at, there's a trade-off. MnPass gives that user the ability to go around the traffic and go faster on that dedicated lane. If we call them high occupancy vehicle lanes too, that means that if you have a passenger in your car, you can take that lane also. But if you're really the single driver, like most of us are, then you're talking about having and I think it's $1.50 a month to rent your MnPass transponder, and you will pay up to, I'm not sure what the top rate is, but I think it might be up to $10 for a trip if it's really congested, and that is based on the congestion and how far you go also. And of course, those we call the Lexus lanes, and Lexus lanes will help us pay for the rest of the roadway. There's no doubt about that. But is that a good solution? I really have a problem with that. There's a lot of social change that we need. If you, no matter what you pay for gasoline, you can go out and look at the people that are in the cars around you, and you'll see that there's one person in a car. Now, should we be encouraging more of the ride sharing? That's all good ideas, and I'm not exactly sure what the best way is to do that. But if we would, for instance, somehow encourage that these high occupancy vehicle lanes get filled, that also takes care of a lot of our congestion.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one? Yeah.
Well, I think that brings some very good points. I think that congestion pricing certainly does help congestion on the short term. But I think long-term congestion at bottlenecks and growth congestion, I think that requires long-term solution. And I think that transit is really the only way that you're going to really be able to relieve congestion in a meaningful way down the road into the future. And, in our community in Senate District 37, we have seen the demographics of transit change dramatically just over the course of the last 15 years. And I have been trying to tell people for many years in our community that if you build transit, people will utilize it in large numbers. And that is why every single day, every park and ride and every transit station in Apple Valley and in surrounding communities are filled. And I think that we're overlooking a really major source of congestion easement is really aggressively going after transit expansion.
Well, you've got quite a bit of transit expansion coming here through the south of the river area. We've got the bus rapid transit lines on I-35W and on Cedar Avenue. Is that going to take care of our immediate transit needs? And if not, what else do we need?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is it's going to help, but I don't think it's going to solve the challenges that we're facing in that area. We have, we've got a lot of cars out there. We've got a lot of people who commute in this county. Dakota County is one of the places where people are moving to and from, and that's a good thing because it means we've got businesses here in Dakota County and certainly in Eagan that are attracting people from north and coming south, and we've got people moving out. The big thing for us is to in my mind, is to make sure we're putting the right transit in the right location. I think the BRT is a great example. That I think is going to be very successful when we see that finally installed there. The other issue is the way they're thinking about addressing the third lane to stop the bottleneck coming out on 77. To basically put one lane on the other side of the highway in the morning and then move move a barrier back, and so it's 3 lanes coming back south. It's an efficient way to think about using the existing resources we have. The key for us, though, I think, is still to figure out what the right piece of infrastructure is in each location, and then find a way to put it there. That's really where I think our challenges are.
Representative Masin, you've been deeply involved in transit. Are we meeting our needs?
I would say we are not. When you've already heard that our park and rides are just totally up to capacity almost as soon as they're open. So it's been very, very challenging to try to keep up with that. But yet we struggle to pay for what we have. So I mean, usually we're doing the best we can to put in the facilities, and which again comes down to not having the appropriate money to spend on some of these projects that we have. But I do remember I was on the MVTA board when we opened a couple of those, I'm thinking Apple Valley and actually Burnsville. I mean, almost immediately we had to put up additional parking. So I mean, the problem is not that people won't use it, they will use it. It's just the fact that we are having the difficulty with the money. And this is not in our district, but I was talking to somebody the other day who lives in Plainview and was driving back, up and back to a job in St. Paul. And he said, everybody on 52, he would pass the same people every single day. I mean, if they had some form of transit or, trains, whatever, think of all the time that they could have spent. So we just have not been able to get to where we need to be. And right now, I am excited because I'm in the legislature. I am serving with people now that truly do understand the need to have transit, trains, and all the other components of the multimodal. But when in the 90s, that just did not happen. I mean, we were fighting just to have buses. So it's been just a slow battle to get us to where we are. And as Mike mentioned, we're competing with other cities, we're competing with other countries who are far way ahead of us than this.
Well, in this environment, with this economy, it's hard to raise new dollars. Do we have the right mix of spending on transit and roads and bridges? Should that be reconsidered? Go ahead.
Well, I think it depends on where you live, and I think that gets back to what I was saying before, was that we need to stop saying that this region is competing against this region for the exact same dollars, and I think that's a zero-sum game that Minnesota can no longer afford. I think that we really need to understand how it is that these other regions, like Denver, like San Diego, like Salt Lake City, how is it that they're able to put together 112 miles of light rail in Denver, Colorado, that they're planning for? I mean, they're attracting high-wage, high-tech jobs to these communities because they're building modern multimodal infrastructure. And we have people that we're fighting against that don't understand the stakes in terms of modernizing the infrastructure to attract the kind of new technologies, businesses that we need to grow our economy. And so I think that yes, the financial system, or the situation that we're in is dire, but just look at the fact that there's billions of dollars of federal money that Minnesota has left on the table that could really have gone a long ways to alleviating a lot of the financial crunch that we're having right now. And those dollars were left on the table for ideological reasons, not for practical reasons. And I think that when it comes to something like transportation, I mean, you made the statement that transportation doesn't seem to have the partisan nature. I would disagree. I think that under the facade of congeniality, that there are profound forces tugging against each other, and that it is these forces that have caused our whole system to be out of whack, that has added expense and cost to a system that right now, as has been stated, we need to modernize. It's not a question of whether or not, simply whether or not this set of highways and roads gets a new layer of blacktop, because that's not sufficient. We need to be looking at how it is that we can compete long-term for the kind of jobs, opportunities that Minnesota has come to expect.
Mr. Iverson, want to jump in on this one?
Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, I think we need to have a real strategic long-term plan about how we're going to address the situation. And then secondly, obviously things always have a cost, but these things are investments in us, and it will bring us revenue into the state in the long term if we can get people here and we can grow jobs here because we have a transportation system that works. And so, I think we need to make sure that we have a plan, and we're not set short-sighted by the current economic situation, but we have a plan for recovery because we are going to recover, and how are we going to get out of it, and are we going to build ourselves a deeper and larger hole by not addressing some of these needs we have now?
And Bill, we haven't really talked about the issue of kind of why this is a great time to start doing these projects now. We've got great interest rates for the bonding projects that we might be able to bond for some of the stuff down the line and get these projects started and take advantage of kind of the fact that we've got a lot of people who would be happy to go back to work right away if we could get going on these projects right away and do some bigger bonding. So I think we'll probably see this year this coming year as we come into the legislature, even though it's not the bonding year, I think we'll see some bonding projects on some of these things to get people back to work and as kind of a short-term economic boost in addition to the opportunity to take really good advantage of some great interest rates.
All three major party candidates for governor this year.
Station was just, they've just sold bonds for 2.81% for 20-year bonds. That's a terrific, terrific deal. The Hastings Bridge was estimated, it was budgeted for $220 million, and the bids came in at $120 million. The Apple Valley Transit parking ramp, they had an option there for an extra level. They got 4 levels for the budget of 3. All of these kinds of things are available today. And like Representative Obermueller said, there's a lot of people that want to get back to work, and that includes the contractors. Contractors will bid just to keep their doors open today. So bonding gives us that ability to get the assets today that it would be silly to wait and save up and buy tomorrow at either higher interest rates or higher costs. Now, again, there is transportation funding, and then there's the general obligation bonds, which we don't always do a lot of transportation funding there. And there we have actually cut back on our investment in education in the general obligation bonds. So I'm a little hesitant to say that let's just take our general obligation bonding authority and use that on transportation. We also look at general obligation. Bonding has a debt service policy of 3%, which is really quite low. And that has resulted in Minnesota having the 42nd, let's say, we're number 42 in the nation in capital debt per person, per capita. We are in great shape. We're better than 41 other states. So we can afford to even bump that 3% up because that puts people back to work immediately. It's a very good thing to do. So yes, I would support bonding with those caveats.
Mr. Iverson, that sounded like a pretty persuasive argument. Would you, would you support a bonding bill?
Oh, obviously, I'd want to read the bill, like my
With
colleagues. But-
transportation projects?
But yes, I would support it.
Well, and I would agree with the caveats that Senator Carlson laid out about the discomfort about using general obligation bonds for transportation funding. But I would really like to see, I would vote for a bonding bill that was designed for roads and bridges as long as I felt that there was going to be a commitment to transportation either in that bill or at some point in the very near future. Because I think that the one thing that gets overlooked about bonding is that it allows a community asset to be shared over a long term, where a project that is very, very expensive to try to come up with the front end cost out of the right out of the chute. When you have a 25-year project that is shared by all the citizens that are paying for that debt service and paying for those bonds over the course of that life of that project, to me, I mean, that is a very democratic way of supporting some of these infrastructure projects instead of forcing one single legislature or one single community to try to come up with a very large amount of money for some of these projects.
Okay. We have, I've described it as a Rube Goldberg kind of a system of operating transit here with the Metro Transit operating in the inner cities, and we've got 6 opt-out 6 bus systems in the suburbs. We now have counties receiving the quarter-cent sales tax for particularly rail transit, but other transit, and we've got regional rail authorities. It seems like a very Rube Goldberg system to me. Do we need to take another look at our transit system and perhaps reshape or reform that in some way? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, I think we do. For me, it starts with what we're going to do with the Met Council and whether there's going to be some reform at the Met Council level. I just think the basis for putting that organization in place essentially was to make sure that people could make decisions without having to worry about being unelected for unpopular decisions they made. But now we've gotten to a point where we're really having trouble getting them to do the things that need to be done. And so, for me, that's where the reform has to start, is on the Met Council level. Whether that, and I don't think it's going to be an all-elected body, but perhaps we could be putting our county commissioners on or something like that to feed the mix a little bit better for all of us, to make sure that we get that reform. But we've got great. I got my go-to card in my wallet here. I get to take that bus up to Minneapolis. Not as much now when I have to come home and knock on doors every day, but do get a chance to get up and take that. And the systems are working well, but they're expensive, and we got to figure out how to make sure that we get the most efficiency out of them as we can. And there might be some ways to combine those things together.
Representative Masin, I know you've been involved in this issue. What are your thoughts?
I think we do have some issues with the Met Council because I firmly believe that we need the Metropolitan Planning Agency. But because now they are doing more with the operations than planning, there seems to be some conflicts there. So I think we need to look at that as one thing. And then serving in the legislature, I know that some of our rural colleagues tend to be a little bit irate every once in a while when they see money going into the Metro Council, and they say, well, we don't have anything. And my thought is, and I had told one of them I'd work with them to get a planning agency. I mean, that is, having a Metro Planning Agency has really benefited our region. And at this point, because the region is growing, we do need to probably expand it or find a different way of doing that. But we haven't been doing that for the rest of the state. And I think we need to be doing that. And I do think, I do sit on as I said, on the Transportation Committee, where MnDOT is trying, as we're working with MnDOT, we are trying to do statewide programs. Because a train that just works in one part of the state really isn't very advantageous unless it benefits the whole state and you can commute to other areas. So, I mean, we are looking at a holistic transit or transportation system throughout the state. But I think that's something maybe sometimes the general public may not be aware of when we're dealing things in bits and pieces. But that is the goal, is to have all of these pieces meshed together. And maybe, as I said, there might be better ways of having the way our Met Council operates. And that might be a better way to look at that, or else maybe having just one statewide agency at this point in time.
And does the rest of you have any comment on this? Senator Carlson? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the Rube Goldberg system, and I have to confess that I'm a mechanical engineer, so the more complicated it is, the better I like it. But I think that it really does fit with a lot of our, our needs. There are things that we can see that are, that might be changed. If, for instance, one of the problems with our Met Council, again, is they're not elected, and one of the good things is that they're not elected. So whether this is a long-term good or bad, I'm not exactly sure. If you can't say it's good all the time. It's good if we have the right philosophy there. And because they're all generally appointed by the governor, they generally they reflect the governor's options. And in fact, Commissioner Bell would say, I serve at the pleasure of the governor, and I serve what the governor wants. Now, as opposed to, for instance, our county board, that the way that they spend the quarter-cent sales tax is the people that are on there are elected, and they have votes based on the size of their county. And I like that idea because they're accountable. They have them, they have to deliver, they have to implement. And I think they're right on the front line with the people that they're trying to serve. Now that, the negative is that sometimes the smaller county gets outvoted. Washington County might tend to quibble with some of the larger counties that they're not getting their share, but they will. And also they do benefit from monies that are spent in other counties too. So I think that we have an adequate system. I think that, and maybe you're going to lead to this merging of the suburban transit authorities into the Met Council, but I think that the suburban transit authorities, they're doing a good job, and their job is somewhat different than the job that has to happen in the cities. The people out here, we're trying to get them out of their third car and to ride transit. The people in the city, a lot of times, they don't have a car, and they need to ride transit. So there's a little different approach there. And I think that the suburban transit is doing a very, very good job in doing their particular assignments.
Mr. Lindstrom, Mr. Germain, I won't ask you about the administration of transit, but what kind of transit improvements would you like to see for your potential constituents?
Well, one thing that I would like to see is that long-term, I think that as a short-term project, I think BRT is going to fulfill short-term expectations. I think long-term into the future, I think we need to seriously look at railizing the Cedar Avenue corridor. Because in my mind, the only way that we are going to truly solve the growing congestion crisis, and that's really what it is, it's going to be a congestion crisis in the Cedar Avenue corridor, is if we create high-capacity systems. And as great a job as MVTA is, I'm an MVTA rider. My wife rides MVTA every single day. For the resources that they're given, they do very, very well. But I think that the overall approach could be expanded. And I think that what has to happen is partly to piggyback on the other conversation is the fact that the Met Council has played games with transit for years, where some lines are put in this cycle, some lines are not. And I think that the vision of the Met Council has changed to the point where we need to really, the 7-county model, I think, is really archaic, and we really need to be looking at a much more expanded model of governance. The big question is, as has been discussed, what are the lines of authority and what are the lines of accountability? And I think that is a huge issue. But I think that there has to be built-in efficiencies where they can be. But as has been said, when you have regional transit authorities who are meeting the needs of their local constituency, as long as the systems are in place to provide seamless transportation from one location to another, it doesn't matter what color the vehicle is painted or what logo is on it, as long as there's seamless transportation. And right now, we have anything but a seamless system. And I think the overall goal has to be, how do we create a seamless system for the future?
Mr. Lindstrom, do you want to jump in on?
Well, I think one of the other things in terms of long-term planning and strategy is that we do have to get people out of their one person per car making the trips from Dakota County into Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I'm not quite sure how you make that cultural shift. I know that Minneapolis Community and Technical College, for example, is either going to have to build a larger parking ramp or find incentives to get their employees to take public transportation. And I think there's possibilities to work public and privately to get your employees on public transportation to ease the congestion so your trucks can get out the door, and so there's incentives not just as public officials to solve these problems, but privately as well.
All right. Well, I want to thank all you candidates for a good discussion. Commissioner Workman is up here giving me the hook.
Just a job I love. Again, I just wanted to thank you for moderating for the 35W Solutions Alliance Forum. We appreciate your time. And candidates, thank you very much for coming down south of the river. Of course, you didn't have to go that far. So, but thank you again for spending your evening with us and providing all your thoughts and comments to the people out there. So good luck to all of you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.